Do you feel that in a time when we are more connected than ever, we are drifting away from real human connections, especially to ourselves? I do. Hi, I'm Leticia Latino, and I want to invite you to join me and my very inspiring guests in exploring ways to reconnect to your essence, to your definite purpose, to what makes you tick. Are you ready? Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Back to Basics. I am excited today, and I know I start every episode saying that, but I have a recurring guest on the show today. I have Keith Trimels, who was my episode 34, Living Life with Gusto, coming back on the show. Hello, Keith.
How are you, Leticia?
I'm super happy to have you on the show again.
Oh, well, I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to a great chat again.
Well, when we first met, and we met through LinkedIn, people that follow the podcast might know this or not, but, we share so many stories. And I remember you say, I can share so many teachable stories because you are someone that lives, really life to its fullest. You do adventure, extreme sports. You are an entrepreneur. I mean, you have so much. And so since we met, everybody out there back in episode 34, now we're in episode 70 something, we kept in touch and we kind of exchange ideas and thoughts and we check with each other, which I love, Keith. So thanks for keeping up.
My pleasure.
And recently we were talking about, the identity crisis that I think it's affecting a lot of people. And Keith shared with me, he heard my episode about rediscovering my why. And we were having so many interesting conversation topics and topics of interest there that we say, let's come back on the show and let's talk about it.
And I said, absolutely, it'd be a blast because any chance that I get to chat with you is a good time. So.
Well, thank you. And by the way, this is a guy that spends half his year living on a boat. So that's already a good conversation starter. How's that going? Are you on the boat right now or are you on firm land?
No, actually, in the Rocky Mountain West, trying to hoping the smoke clears so that we can get some hang gliding in before the snow starts falling, and then head back to the boat and spend a little time there. As I say, the more I move, the harder it is for people to catch me, and if the authorities are listening, you stay one step ahead of them. So.
Well, but that has you talking with a lot of people. And I know that we were saying, these COVID times are hard for everybody. So one of the purposes of the podcast these days, I've had a little series called the COVID series where, we get more in depth into what we're going to, how we're dealing with things. How you been dealing with these changing and trying times, Keith?
It hasn't actually changed the way I operate too much. It affected kind of how we live on the boat in Mexico, and the boat now is actually up in California because I did a big sail trip up the coast of Baja this spring. But fortunately, I've been able to move around and I've been flying and traveling, and it hasn't impacted my day-to-day operations. What it has impacted is some of my clients and the folks that I've been helping, and I've seen some consistent themes throughout that.
And we were saying before that people, I don't think I felt like I went through an identity crisis, but I definitely felt that I needed to be more focused on my why and what I was doing and that's why I did a whole episode on it. And I'm so happy because really has kept me, like if I was on that sailboat of yours, I knew what my north was or what my direction was. And even when other things came to try to distract me, it really gave me hope. So I know you've said that you had a lot of customers and even family members that you feel they're struggling with that.
Yeah. And I think you went, and I listened to that podcast, by the way, and this is kind of one of the things that started our most recent thread of conversations. where you had rediscovered your faith and rediscovered your why. And I think part of the struggle that I've seen with some clients and some family members, as you mentioned, is that when COVID hit, most people, and there's some science behind this, but everybody says, "Hey, I'm Keith, and this is who I am, and I'm this person," and they define themselves or their identity. And one client that I have, as an example, has owned a restaurant for almost 40 years, and so that was his identity as a restaurateur. Although I would say that he's done some incredible sailing, and he's got another side business that we're working on. And I had a family member who saw herself as her as a mom and a grandma, as an aunt that I hadn't talked to in heck, probably almost a decade. And the thread is that I've seen with folks that are struggling, particularly with the COVID situation and struggling at a larger magnitude than most, is that something has been lost or damaged, and whether it's their business or their job or whatever, where they saw that as their identity. And the problem with that is that if you accept, and I think it's a false premise, but if you accept the premise that your identity is a single identity, then you're vulnerable to any damage to that identity. So if that identity falters, or people question, or you're not as perfect as you thought you would be, then it starts to cut to the core of who you are, and you start questioning why you're even on the planet, and you can start to question your why, because you tend to see yourself as that single identity or one dimensional. And I sat through a presentation and chatted with a gentleman named Todd Herman last fall, and he wrote a book called The Alter Ego. But Todd is a performance coach, and he works with incredibly high-end athletes and actors and actresses in Hollywood and CEOs of large corporations in New York. He's based out of New York. But what he talks about is the science behind that is all wrong, because we're actually multiple identities rather than a single identity.
That's very interesting, because I haven't heard of him, but I definitely will check out the book and put it on the show notes. But that's exactly what I felt when I was redoing my webpage, or actually when I launched my webpage during COVID. It's like I don't feel that one role defines me. And sometimes I feel alone in the thought, because I find so many people, especially now that some of them have been laid off, that speak about the company they work for. Like, we do this, we do that, we do this, we do that. And it always hit me, right? And I don't know, because maybe I work for myself, that I say, she speaks for the we like it's really hers, which is in a way a good thing. But then, they kick you in the, what, when things are not good. In COVID times, justifiable, but sometimes it's really for no reason. And then the we just disappears, and then people don't know what to hold on to anymore. They lose their identity because their job is their identity.
And this is, so to give you one of the things that Todd talks about is, think about this. Okay, think about an athlete, and he's got a story about Bo Jackson. And Bo Jackson, for anybody who doesn't know, was a phenomenal athlete. He's the only athlete, I think, who was an all-pro in two major sports, in both NFL football and Major League Baseball. He's incredible. And he talks about a conversation he had with Bo Jackson backstage when they were both doing a presentation. But think about it in these terms. If you're Tom Brady, or pick your favorite athlete today, okay, or an actress, that you're George Clooney or whoever, it doesn't much matter. But if your identity is the identity that's out there, as an example, rather than the true you, which is a collection of a bunch of different things. So if, George Clooney, sure, he's an actor, but he's also a son, to his mother, and, all those other things that we all are in our life. But if your sole identity is wrapped up in let's just use Tom Brady, who went from New England down to Tampa Bay. If Tom Brady's entire identity is wrapped up in being a quarterback in the NFL, and he has 3 or 4 bad games, is he no longer worthwhile? Is he? I mean, if that's his purpose, if that's his why, and it's nothing else, there's not a collection of other things, then it's easy to become damaged when we don't perform at that level, whether it's because of our failings, whether he has a bad game as a quarterback, or whether he has nobody to throw the ball to and he has no receivers and he can't do what he's supposed to do. His then self-worth, his why can become questioned if that's the sole purpose of his why. So what Todd talks about in when he does performance coaching with folks is that we are a collection of multiple identities, and they this is not his term, but you basically, what he does is he tends to isolate that performance for him, he's a performance coach, and that requires, I mean, he's working with some very high-end people, and there's some very intense conversations that go on. Well, then he goes home and he's with his 3 kids. He can't have that level of intensity with 3 young children. I mean, it's just not going to work. He's got kids in kindergarten. So he has to change his identity when he walks through that door and be the person that he wants to be for them. And that's not the totality of who he is, the dad and the husband. And it's also not the totality of who he is as the business coach. The collection of all of them together is the totality of who he is. And what that does when you recognize that reality is it gives you the ability to withstand shots on any one of those identities. So if you're a business owner and your business has been shut down because of COVID, but you see the totality of your identity as part of it as a business owner, yes, but in your case, Letitia, you're also a mom, you're a wife, you're a boater, you're a mentor to other women, you're a podcast, you're all these things, podcaster, and on. Taking a shot across the bow, if you will, on a thing like a business, yeah, it's going to rock you, but it's not going to sink your boat because you're recognizing I've got all these other things that are also make up who I am. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think you and I are always so aligned. That's why I enjoy our conversations. I just told my husband the other day, and I think you would you would understand what I'm saying. I'm saying, even for the audience that some might get it, some not. But I told my husband the other day, I know that before I came into COVID as one thing, and I'm going to get out of COVID as something else.
Yeah, it's a metamorphosis, right? Like from a caterpillar to a butterfly.
But precisely because what you said, because the business world is so changed right now that we cannot be our usual business person, right? We're not out there in meetings. We're not out there at conference. So we are handling business a little bit different. And in my opinion, it's also not as demanding. Of course, it's not as demanding as normally because I'm not even traveling when normally I travel a lot. So I've been able to work on some of the other identities, as you're mentioning. Mm-hmm. So I've done my first public speaking engagements, where I got paid. I told my husband, they want to pay me for this. I've never been paid for anything in terms of speaking, And so I realized that during COVID times, I'm really establishing other aspects of myself just because I've given more attention. And I think that's so powerful what you're saying, because we tend to give attention to one side, or maybe we have the different identities, but we don't bring them up. And we leave them down there and we just raise a few of them.
Well, and sometimes what dominates is a function of how we react to the environment around us at a given time, right? So the environment can kind of dictate what part of our identity dominates, and sometimes it's our decision. But there's another thing, and this was brought up by a conversation with my aunt that I was having, and we had it over 2 different states, 3 different conversations, 2 in person and one 3+ hour conversation on the phone. And it was actually a kind of a concept that my friend Ilse shared with me. And I know you've chatted with her as well. And she's the first person that kind of articulated this to me in a way that it made sense. Was we have these different parts of our identity that make up our why, as you and I have talked, right? And so our why, which is our purpose, is comprised of the gifts that God has given us, the things that we're passionate about, the experiences that we've had. And everybody has a unique mix of those things, but there's not a single part of that. It's like a stew. There's different ingredients to that. And each of those ingredients are different pieces of our identity, or different individual identities that aggregate together. And I was having this conversation with my aunt, and it came up in the conversation where she said, I see myself as a mom and grandma. And I said, wait a minute. I mean, I've known you my entire life, obviously. She's my godmother. And I said, I know you happen to be a school nurse, and I can think of at least a dozen kids that I'm aware of that you impacted their life in majorly large ways, and you weren't their mother or their grandmother. You were a school nurse. That's part of your identity of what you did. And you also happen to be a wife, and all these other things. She used to do wedding cakes, these incredible, beautiful cakes, and she paints these amazing paintings. It could be in any gallery anywhere in California. Those are all parts of her identity. It's not one thing. And as soon as I pointed that out to her, it was like the light bulb went off in her head. And I told her, I said, one of the things that Ilsa shared with me is that it's not the idea of these multiple identities. That was something that kind of, I guess I inherently knew, but Todd Herman had articulated in a way that totally made sense. But it's that the part of our a sub-identity, if you will, or an individual identity, can become dominant, not only because of the circumstances of our life and, whether we're doing it or whatever, it could be dictated, but it also tends to morph over time. When we're 12 years old, our identity is maybe as a student and a child. And then maybe there's a time where that identity shifts to a spouse and a parent. And then, maybe there's a time when the major focus of that identity is as a business owner. And it could be between those two, or it could be after it, or simultaneously. And that our life is like a giant story, a tapestry, right? And there's these individual chapters, and the part of our aggregated identity, the one maybe dominant part of our identity, may be different in chapter 3 than it is in chapter 23 and chapter 43, and that's perfectly normal, and we should embrace it.
That's great. And so I'm wondering, did you give her any advice in terms of like, how do we rediscover those identities, or how do we connect with those identities, or how do we bring it together?
Well, what I told her is the first thing she needs to do is think about all the people that she's impacted. And it kind of gets lost at me. I'll speak for myself. I tend to sweep it under the rug. How we met was through Kristen Seltzer, and Kristen had made a comment, about how I had helped her, and I didn't even, I was just talking with her, and if it wasn't for that, it would have not even resonated with me. I would have never even thought about it. I wouldn't have given it a second thought. The fact that Kristen mentioned it, it did resonate. It came back to me, and then Kristen and I subsequently were doing work together for a client of mine, and it's absolutely delightful. So it's totally enriched my life. So the first thing I would say is sit back and think about those people that you've helped. And one of the ways that you can do that is if you have a mentor of yours, or a confidant, or a spouse, or a good friend or whatever, ask them, because it's often much easier for somebody, we tend to lose sight of the forest through the trees when we're looking at it through our eyes, and somebody who just has an objective view, or, it's outside our own head, can see it a little bit easier. And if you sit down and you make a list, and that list is given to you by somebody, or you go through and make it up on your own, and you realize how many different impacts that you've made, those are all clues to your identity. And they're also, as you've found out, they're clues to your why. And they kind of point to where that next step is going to be. I mean, they're the little clues, as you and I would say. It's the Holy Spirit talking to you to say, hey, look, this is kind of what I need you to do. Right. And so I think when you do that and you see it visually, it becomes a lot easier to see the picture that's comprised of these individual puzzle pieces. And it also helps increase your resiliency because you realize that not a single one of these things defines you. So if that single thing is struggling, you're struggling with it right now, or maybe it's fading away, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing because it's not the definition of who you are in its entirety.
Yeah. Good point. And I agree. I think in times like these, people in that rediscovering, although it's very difficult, these are very difficult times, you actually discover what you're capable of. I already know several people that either, my personal trainer started doing something else to make ends meet during the pandemic. Now, I don't think he's going back to training because he's realized that, I can do this other thing and I like it better, or I'm making more money. It's strange how life works out. And sometimes, we get disrupted if we don't disrupt ourselves, we get disrupted by life. I'm a firm believer in that.
And that's, it's so critical because it's those things that allow us to see, to explore, discover, rediscover those passions, those things that bring us joy, which all gather together to point us to our why, that overall why. And the why is not an identity as much as it is a purpose. And that purpose is made up of these experiences, these individual identities. And I totally agree with you that if we don't consciously make an effort to shake ourselves up, if you will, or to, shake off the barnacles, that life will do that for us. And the reason is because by strengthening our understanding of our why, which is increasing our knowledge of what lights us up and what identities that we possess, that's how we build our resiliency, so that as we move through this thing called life, we become stronger and stronger, and hopefully can translate that into a bigger and bigger impact. And it doesn't mean your name necessarily up in lights, but it could be that you're making a bigger impact, in the people around you.
Yeah, that's at least I know what we're trying to do with the podcast is be hopeful, and try to create change. And I share on the episode, but through my why experiment, I say, I can maybe help someone make a change, a micro step towards something that they wanted to do. And with that little push, then you created a little ripple effect. And it's very empowering, to hear. And you mentioned Kristen is someone I'm in touch with, people, amazing people I met through the podcast that I would have not met otherwise. So those little things that happen, synchronicities, in life, but you would never know unless you get the ball rolling.
Exactly. Somebody's got to start, somebody's got to push the rock down the hill so that it can gather some speed. Right. And we can either be the instigators of that rock, or what's going to happen is gravity and a little bit of wind is going to push it, and it's going to be outside of your control. And so one of the things that not that it's part of what I do with my clients, but it ends up happening this way, that I've had this conversation with a couple different clients over the last 3 months, is that oftentimes as individuals, it's better if we regularly take time to do this deep thinking, and it's hard work. It's not easy. You got to shut all the distractions of life, whether it's a television or a radio or kids or spouses or whatever. You got to shut it down for a little bit, but to evaluate that why and continue to strive towards it. And when you feel that it might be time to shake some of those barnacles off, to initiate it, because if you don't initiate it, it's going to be initiated for you. And then you're going to be reacting to the situation rather than kind of guiding it more in the direction that hopefully, if you spent some time thinking about your why, that you kind of, know that you need to go. And as most people that I know have experienced over the last 6 months, this has been one giant experiment in having to do it. Because if you can't leave your house for whatever reason, whether you're concerned about your safety or whether you're being told you can't, and you've got to sit there and think about stuff. There's only so much Netflix you can binge on, and then you kind of run out of shows. There's a point at which I think we've all come face to face with that idea that, hey, look, I need to figure out what I'm supposed to do on the other side of this, or, what I was put here to do, or, those sorts of questions. And those are the deep questions of life that often get lost when we get wrapped up in the day-to-day rush of, hey, I got to get the kids to school, or I got to get to the office because I got a staff meeting or whatever it is. So.
Yeah, well, it brings a interesting thought. Today is the first day that they were taping this. Is the first day I took my kids to school to go in person. So that definitely is, leaving aside all the mixed emotions you get, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? Because they could have kept going online, but then, okay, we decide they go. And then you also go through the motion of, okay, here it goes. My life is kind of starting to go back to a certain normal because I drop them off. And then I say, let me go to the office where I live and work very close. So I haven't been coming that much to the office. And then you think, okay, how do I want to start this? I don't want to start it to a point where it goes crazy as it was before COVID. Right. And exactly. I think a lot of us are dealing with that. And I've been saying it in every time I speak in speaking engagements too. We have to really be very conscious and mindful of what do we want to bring with us in this post-COVID life and what is not serving us and we want to leave behind.
And to the extent that we can control that, that's great. A lot of those things we don't necessarily have control over. And I'll give you an example. I've got a friend here in town, and he was talking with the owner of OtterBox, and OtterBox is an associate of his, a friend, if you will. OtterBox makes cases for iPhones and things like that, and they're a large multinational company. I mean, they got a global presence, but they're based out of Colorado. And OtterBox has an office, a building with 300 employees. And the owner of OtterBox was telling this friend of mine, Steven, that because of COVID and the lockdown, everybody except for 6 employees was working from their home. Okay. So he had previously had his main headquarters with 300 employees. 294 of them are now working from home, and 6 people are working in the office. And he said it was an interesting thing. He discovered their sales haven't suffered. Productivity hasn't suffered. They've been able to do this. So he was looking at it and he said, why are we sitting here holding on to this expensive real estate, paying all of the overhead of this real estate, the operations, the taxes, etc., when we're able to do the same thing and we could have an office that had 10 people in it rather than 300. And so he was looking at the possibility of liquidating that building or renting it or doing whatever, just making a business decision. Well, those 294 employees are now having to deal with something that it's not part of their decision-making process, right? So they may not have that luxury like you did of deciding, hey, do I want to do this or not? And they're going to have to adapt. And that's where it's even more important to step back and say, okay, what part of my overall identity is being an employee of OtterBox, or, if I'm a vice president or whatever that role is. And so it takes a lot of work, and it's a nonstop work. I mean, based on individuals that I've talked to who are in their 90s and pushing 100, if you're doing this, the work doesn't ever end until the game is over and they put you in a box in the ground, because there's always lessons to learn and striving to do to figure out that why.
Yeah, absolutely. But if there's a good time to really think closely at all these things, is now. So I'm very, very happy that we had this chat and this conversation, and as you talk, I already know the the title of the episode not always comes to me, but it's the clues to our why. I love that you said that. And it's to pay attention to those clues and understand them. So is there anything else, Keith? I mean, you have so much amazing insight that we already agreed you're going to be my my recurring guest on all things, all subjects. You come and you share your view because I really like it. Anything else fun and exciting going on for you that despite the circumstances, you've been able to do?
Well, I'm looking at a clear sky out here in the Rocky Mountains today, so maybe we'll be able to get some hang gliding in here within the next week or so. And got a client that's doing a launch on their new Bloody Mary mix. So that's all pretty exciting. We've got some exciting stuff coming up here. And once we get all this done, it'll be time for me to take a little bit of time off and go hide in the mountain or hide on the boat for a little bit and spend some time thinking, because I haven't had a lot of time to do that in the last couple months myself as we're running around. So.
Well, it doesn't sound like that because you have a great insight. But, you made me think of something. When we started this chat, you said, well, not much has changed for me. And, it's really now it's resonating because I see you as someone that has built his life around things you like and working hard. And you really have tried to really build a life you enjoy. And so now you're saying, yeah, I'm working really hard for what it sounds, but now you're going to go do something fun. So you've been able to really mix, the professional life with your personal life pretty well.
Well, and I can tell you it's something I've been working towards for, probably over 40 years. And it's, it's always a work in progress, but to the extent that you can figure that out, or at least, hone in more closely on it, not only does it give you more personal joy and satisfaction, but for me, it actually helps me do what I know I was put here to do, and that's help other people achieve the things that they want to do. So whether it's, my client who is doing this nationally relaunching his Bloody Mary mix online, or whether it's dealing with a client in Australia, reimagine his business and regrow it back up to 8 figures from 7 figures. It allows me to do that if I take the time, that balance, to recharge my batteries. Because as we all know, as you know, as a parent, it takes a lot of energy to serve those that we're here to serve. And we got to be good to ourselves and recharge our own batteries along the way as well.
That's great. Well, thank you, Keith. I definitely recharge my batteries when I talk to you. You're definitely, the thoughts you have are always, intrigue me. And I'm so happy that you are in my podcast again. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thank you for having me, and look forward. We'll have to do it again, and I'm sure we'll have a chat soon at any rate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You and Niels, your partner, who also has an episode on Back to Basics, for those of you that follow, they're great together. And I think I almost got them convinced to be on the show together. So I'm very excited about it.
Well, that would be exciting to do that. I would love to do it.
All right. Well, you keep healthy and safe and having fun, Keith. And until the next time.
Take care. Thank you so much, Letitia.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And until the next time.